virtual solutions. So some years ago, when we were working on partnering with Cisco, we started to develop a number of different kind of virtual solutions for our product, and also extensions. You know, you may have heard me talk about virtual ports. That's probably the thing that we see people using the most. Oh, and of course, the virtual control center is very popular these days. So yeah, we started adding this sort of stuff about 7 years ago. Virtual ports are used when we can't physically cable a console connection to a system. Maybe it's a VM and it doesn't have a console port. Maybe it's a WAN, or a wireless access controller, or a wireless, switch, or whatever access point, and it doesn't have a serial port. So we can use these virtual ports to connect to those systems. We can also connect to a virtual modem if you've got an external modem that's somewhere on your local network that we can use for our out of band. We can do that. We also have these virtual local managers that just run as a VM and then connect to either systems directly using virtual ports, or can connect through existing console servers. And then, of course, the control center is available as a virtual machine. That's very popular these days. So again, virtual ports, we can use them in a number of different ways. They can run on a hardware local manager. You can run a whole slot, 16 virtual ports on most local managers. And then, you can use those to connect to basically anything that you can SSH or Telnet to. Maybe you've got, like I said, you've got, VMs that you might want to manage, or systems without a console port. But also sometimes people will have, a switch in an IDF that they can't run a console port to. And this virtual port, we can connect to it and still do some management. You can't do as much recovery stuff if you don't have that console port connection, but it still lets us connect to it, do backups, get you secure access, that sort of stuff. So there are a couple different ways to skin a cat if you want to use virtual ports to console server. And the main thing to just know is that virtual ports will do a serial over telnet to or SSH to a system. So you might have a virtual local manager, maybe you've got a physical one. Either way, it doesn't matter. Virtual ports will connect to a system on SSH or telnet. So if you have like a VM firewall, for example, that has a SSH interface running, we can configure a virtual port to connect to that, and that gives us access over the network. These work whether to whatever system you're connecting to. Basically, if it's got SSH or Telnet, we can connect to it over the network. Again, yeah, you're limited on the hardware platforms to a maximum of 16 virtual ports. The slot depends on the hardware version you have, but on the LM83, that's going to be slot 5 for those virtual ports. The 500, 5000s, that's slot 4. And you're not supposed to run more than 56 total ports on them. So if you have a fully loaded 56 port serial LM83X, our software team recommends you not run any more virtual ports on that, just because you're going over the maximum for the hardware. I honestly think that with the new hardware, with the 83Xs, you can do that without a real problem. They're a lot faster than the 500s and the 5000s were. And it's a license feature, of course, virtual ports. That's part of the control center license. There's just a number of virtual ports that you have license to, and you just just limited based on that. So you can create them in the control center. So now I can go to my inventory. I can go to one of my local managers, and all right. So this is going to live under the system. section of the configuration there. And at the very bottom, you've got virtual slots. Oops, now this is acting wacky again. It's trying to download the link. All right, refresh the page. Now, refresh the controls. There we go. So if I click virtual slots, you can see here, I get to select the slot. You know, what port is it going to be? We'll configure port 1. What IP is this going to connect to? I'm actually, just to be silly, I'm going to do a virtual port back to my own same local manager. TCP port 22 on SSH. You can do Telnet if you prefer, but nobody uses Telnet. And then I'm going to give it a username and password to log into the Uplogix with. It's going to be wwt user and my password there. You could also do RSA keys for those virtual ports if you have a system that doesn't want to do password authentication. So there we go. You can see now it's listed here, port 3/1. It's a virtual slot. You know, of course, if you need to, you can remove them from here like that. But I'm going to keep it for a moment so we can play with it a little bit. Oops. Make sure to hit save. So yeah, you can see that slot. You know, we've created it newly. It's in native mode, and I can now use it to connect back to the control center. You can also do that on the command line, config system slot 4 or 3, whatever it might be. Again, LM83X will use slot 5 instead of 4. Just depends on the model, and it'll enforce that, so you don't have to worry too much about getting it wrong. So yeah, go ahead and create a virtual port, either on the control center or the command line. Again, that's config system slot 4 on the command line. You want to do that, and then let me just show you again how those work. If I pull up my terminal session and reconnect, let me just show you on a different system. So yeah, so you can see on this system I have on slot 5, because this is the LM83X, I have one virtual port defined. That's to this Palo Alto, which is a VM. So this would be similar, you know, like Anthony said, you have some systems that you just can't run that serial to, but we still want to do some command and control with them. So yeah, from the port level, you just configure it with that same, you know, let's try it again. Port 1, and I'm pretty sure I know the credentials to this system, so I'm just going to set up. Oh, that's what I skipped. I skipped the port maybe. So yeah, it's warning me, hey, you've already got one configured to the system, but we're going to go ahead anyway. At that point, you know, it's going to ask you for credentials, right? And it's actually going to test them. You know, you get a host key check, make sure you're connecting to the right system, right? And then, so here it is. It's going to connect. And it connected fine. Great. So now I can exit that editor, right? And now go to port 5/1 that we just created and just terminal in, and it's going to take me across that SSH connection to that Palo Alto's SSH command line interface. And again, this could be a router or switch, anything. It doesn't matter. You know, SSH port 22, any system for that. Virtual modems, you know, you really don't see this in use, but if you had a modem on the network that the Uplogix needed to use, we could create a virtual port to that modem and use that modem instead. Again, you know, this isn't a very common use case, but it's just like the virtual slots. You know, create a modem slot instead of the slot 3 or 4, and you know, username password as your need. So yeah, the Uplogix local manager, again, it can run on basically any VM hardware. You know, we've mainly done it on ESXi hosts, but you know, it's just a little VM that you know, again, by default, it doesn't have any serial ports, right? Because it doesn't have physical ports. But you can configure, it looks like 3 slots, 16 ports each on those VMs. And then also sometimes what people will do is they'll grab USB serial hubs and connect them to a VM host or over to a system that the VM can reach with those virtual ports. And so a VM local manager can actually connect using a virtual port to a physical console port that then connects to your router or switch on these StarTech hubs. So it's a kind of a weird use case. Again, we don't see this one very much either. I don't think you guys are actually running any virtual local managers at all because, you know, again, when you're running it as a VM, you don't have those physical connections, and so a lot of the recovery stuff can't work necessarily. So, you know, local managers in the control center, this is what they look like. You know, instead of the picture of the hardware, we give you a nice blue VM image there. And yeah, whatever ports you have configured, they'll show up under the, you know, the port that level there. Otherwise, it looks and feels and acts just like the rest of the local managers. You know, you have all the same commands, same command line, same capabilities, again, except for, you know, the physical connectivity for the most part. Again, the control center, we've been running that in ESXi as a VM for, you know, probably about 7 years now, maybe 10. Depending on your hardware, you know, it can support, you know, huge deployments. It's just a matter of how many resources you give the VM, right? A lot of people like it, but a lot of people like to have a physical server too, which, you know, there's pros and cons to each for that. But that was the virtual training segment.